All right. That is not up behind my screen like I wanted it to be, so give me 1 second. There we go. Okay, there we go. So we're going to start on the home sale contingency section of the contingencies and clauses addendum from yesterday. Okay, so we went through a whole bunch of the clauses, if you will, that are in that document that could be invoked for a buyer in their offer. And this one can get a little bit confusing. So I wanted to spend some time on it while you guys were fresh and hadn't turned me into Charlie Brown's teacher and actually could hear how I explain it. Yes. So that this addendum is very wordy. And so what I want to do is just talk about the process that it goes through in this section. Okay. When you hear someone talk about a kickout clause, or for those of us that have been in the business since before we had Bright, when it was MRIS, we had a status that was contingent with kickout or contingent no kickout. And so what the contingent with kickout meant is that there was a kickout clause. And the kickout clause is so that a seller who accepts a buyer that has a home sale contingency actually has the ability to kick out that first buyer who's ratified and take a new offer from someone who doesn't have a home sale contingency. Okay. So what this, I'm going to shut one of the doors, sorry. So what this contingency lays out as a timeline that says that the seller is going to give the buyer a certain number of days from ratification to sell their home. Now the word sell does not mean go to closing. The word sell means get the home on the market, under contract, through contingencies that do not include financing or appraisal. So any contingencies for inspections, things like that, okay? And during that time period, the seller is still marketing the home in the MLS as active under contract. So they're trying to get another offer. They're trying to get a backup offer, right? If at the end of the time period that is agreed to, the buyer has not been able to satisfy the contingency and get the home sold, as far as under contract and through those contingencies, or the buyer has not provided proof of cash or a lender letter that shows they can close without selling their other home, this contract becomes void. The contract just dies, okay? It's dead. The earnest money gets released back to the buyer. Everybody goes on their separate way, okay? If during that time frame that the seller is giving the buyer to go and find a buyer for their home, another offer comes in and there is no home sale contingency on it, the seller has a certain number of days based on one of the blanks in this document. The seller says to the buyer, hey, we have another offer. You have blank number of days to remove this contingency, or we are kicking out your contract and we are going with buyer number 2. Okay. So remember, there's only those couple of things that allow a buyer to release this contingency. They can't just say, I'm going to take a chance. They have to prove that they have a ratified contract on the home they're selling and that they've been through those contingencies, or a lender letter or cash. Okay. They can't just take the risk. A previous version of our contract from years ago allowed them to just take the risk. And that was taken away because the risk, it was not a good thing, right? Well, a bridge loan is a lender letter that says that they don't have to sell the home, okay? The other piece of this contingency is that settlement of the buyer's home survives removing the other part of the contingency. So they only have to get through inspections and those types of things to be able to satisfy the home sale contingency, but they still have to get to settlement. So if that buyer backs out or defaults that's buying this client's home, the buyer on this contract that we're looking at can void. Okay, so settlement of their home is still in place because we know up front that they need the money or they need to sell it to get it off of their debt to income ratio. We know there's some reason that it still has to go to closing. Okay. There's a separate paragraph, which is number 2 on this document, that is only the settlement of the purchaser's home. That is to be used if the home is not already on the market and under contract. Okay, if the buyer's home is already on the market and under contract, you use paragraph number 2 because it's only the settlement of their home that you need. But if they're not on the market or not under contract yet, you use number 1. Okay. So the way this paragraph reads, the contract is contingent until blank number of days after ratification upon the sale of the buyer's property located at whatever address. This should not be a number that is a single digit. Okay, this is something that's going to give enough time for the buyer to get their home under contract and through contingencies. So I see 30, 45 days in here a lot. I don't think it should be something less than 30. I don't think that's a reasonable expectation for anyone. They have to put their address in here, right? For a couple of things, because we have to know where the property is. It's tied to that specific sale. The other thing is, as a listing agent, you should be researching that property to find out whether it's priced right, how soon you think it's going to sell, etc. The next paragraph is that number of days that if a backup offer comes in, the buyer has to figure out how to satisfy the contingency or the seller is going to kick them out. Okay, this should be like 3 to 5 days. This shouldn't be a long contingency, but 1 day is not reasonable. So 3 to 5 days is what I would suggest here. 1A2 is for when the house is not yet active. So sometimes you'll get an offer and the house is already active in the MLS. They just don't have a contract yet. 1A2 is for when it's not active in the MLS. So they say they're going to put the home active in the MLS. And there's a blank that says they're going to put the home active in the MLS in however many days and what their list price is going to be. Again, this is so a listing agent can review the situation and see how likely it is that that home is going to sell, right? Because if all the comps say 500,000 and they want to list it for 6, I don't think that I would suggest to my seller that we take the home sale contingency, right? Because it doesn't seem like it's going to work out. But if the comps say 5 and they're going to list it at 485 so that they can generate, some traffic and whatnot, and it looks nice, then I'd say, maybe it's worth a shot. 1A3 talks about how that contingency gets removed. So those items that I just went over with you, as far as, how they prove that they're satisfying the contingency, okay? 1A4 talks about the part of the settlement that survives, okay? So if they've removed the contingency piece, so they're under contract through the contingencies, everything's great, and they just have to get to settlement, 1A4 is what says that the settlement piece still applies, and there's a blank that says that this contract will automatically have settlement delayed by a certain number of days if the settlement of their property has been delayed also, right? This shouldn't be more than 1 day, in my opinion. I think there should be a meeting of the minds before an automatic delay, because you don't know what the seller's situation is. There are times where the property is vacant and the seller's already moved on, and it doesn't matter if it delays or not, and you have, you know, 7 days or something written in there, every once in a while you might have something like that, and that's okay. But in general, it should be 1 day that there's an automatic delay, and then every other time you have to sign an addendum agreeing to the further extension. There's also a box that says the seller will or will not accept an assignment of funds. An assignment of funds means that the seller is taking the title company's word that the other sale has happened and the funds have not been sent yet to the title company. Like, they might not have gone on record and dispersed yet, but the closing has occurred, right? So the money from this buyer's sale has not gone to the buyer's bank account and then from their bank account to the title company in this transaction. It's going from the bank account of title company 1 to title company number 2, and it may not have dispersed at the time of this closing. There might be a day or 2 delay.
So in a situation where the first home is sold,
Mm-hmm.
they can't distribute funds until title's recorded.
Yes.
This is now at day 3, probably
Mm-hmm.
after closing.
Yes.
So the house they're buying,
Mm-hmm.
the settlement date should be say 5 or 7 after the other settlement date.
No, it could be simultaneous.
Okay.
It could be the same day. I don't like same day closings anyway. I really would like to have like a day or 2 in between, but assignment of funds is really for the same day closings, right? Where it hasn't recorded and dispersed, but the title company A has said, yes, the settlement has completed. I just can't send the money yet. But they're sending a document that says there are funds coming, and they're accepting that as the buyer having completed the transaction. Yes, Laura.
So would you suggest will or will not?
I suggest will. I suggest will, unless you are making sure that you have a long delay in between the closings. If you have a week in between, then you don't need the assignment of funds. But if it's a tight closing, then absolutely you would need the assignment of funds. Lucia, you have a question.
I do. So once the contingency, the home sale contingency has been satisfied, is an addendum the form that we use to satisfy it with a copy of the contract accepted by the buyer on the sale of their home?
No. It says to satisfy the contingency, you deliver a copy of the ratified contract with evidence that the contingencies have been removed, or you deliver the lender letter saying that they don't have to have the home sale, or you provide evidence of sufficient funds to close without the home being sold.
Okay, so just a ratified contract. Okay.
Yeah, with evidence that those other contingencies have been removed. Yeah,
correct.
There's no addendum.
Thank you.
So this B section right here is just the settlement of the buyer's property. So it's the same exact paragraph up here. It's just the part that can be invoked if they're already under contract. Okay. Section C is contingent on the seller purchasing another home. So this is what we refer to as the home of choice contingency. So when the seller says, look, I don't have anywhere to go yet, but I want to put my home on the market and I want to secure a buyer, but I still need to find a place to go. And you say, no problem. You're not going to be homeless because we can put this paragraph in. And if you don't find a place, then we void the contract. Okay. So the home of choice contingency says that the seller has X number of days from the ratification date to go find a new home, to get under contract, and to get through their due diligence process, like their home inspections and things like that, to make sure that it is the correct property for them. And once they do that, then they can serve notice to the buyer and say, hey, we found a place and we're removing the contingency. Okay. There's nothing that prevents any of these contingencies from being extended by agreement with the sales contract addendum if you're getting close to an expiration date and we don't want the contract to just be void. In this paragraph, different from how in the home sale contingency for the buyer, if they don't satisfy, the contract's just dead. In this paragraph, if they don't remove the contingency or void before the deadline, the contingency just expires, like every other contingency that we have in a contract, right? It just is removed automatically. Okay, so you have to watch those timelines. Pam, you have a question?
Yes, about the home sale and the closing of the home contingency, shouldn't both of those be signed? Because you don't want to have the buyer release that contingency, but not release it be contingent upon the successful settlement.
So that was part of what I was explaining in the first section, is that the settlement piece is already included that survives if you remove the contingency. So okay, that's already included. You only do B if their home is under contract and you don't need the rest of it. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So if you do 1A, you don't do this settlement of buyer's property. Okay. Because you already have it. All right. I told you guys yesterday, don't do general addendum. We went over all of the rest of it. So any other questions on this addendum? Did that make sense how I explained the home sale contingency? If you thought you had to read that paragraph, was it before I explained it? Was that going to make your head hurt? For anyone who has done this before, did that help to clarify anything on a home sale contingency? Did you learn anything in the way that I explained it? Okay. Okay, it makes more sense what happened. Okay, perfect. Awesome. So the next document that I want to go over is the escalation addendum. And this is also one that I'm not really going to read to you. I'm going to explain to you what it says. There are two blanks in the middle of the first paragraph.
Shannon?
Yes.
On the home sale contingency, so once we satisfy that ratified contract and the everything else besides the home financing and appraisal has been satisfied, so we still have the last paragraph, like if they don't go to settlement, they don't have to buy that new home, right? Like how, like if that were to happen, what's the appropriate documentation to
you deliver a notice to void with the backup document showing that the other contract is dead.
Okay.
And it tells you right in the paragraph what to provide.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so the escalation addenda is one of the most incorrectly used documents in our forms library, and it drives me nuts. Okay, so none of you will use it wrong because I'm going to explain exactly how it should be used. So the first paragraph says that the buyer is offering to pay a dollar amount above this any other offer, okay, with a cap. So as an example, their page 1 of the contract says they're offering $500,000, but they're sending the escalation addendum saying, well, I'm really willing to pay $575. If somebody else is willing to pay more than what I've offered, I'll pay up to $575 and I'll beat that second place offer by a certain number. Now, for negotiation tips and tricks, I suggest that you don't ever use a round number. Use a random number that is not close to $1,000. Okay, so you don't want to use a random number that's under $1,000, but you want to use a random number so that you actually beat somebody else, because other agents are going to put 500, 1,000, 1,500. If your client really wants the house and they need to put something like $8,000 or $9,527, right? Like they need to put a lot of money if they're going to beat somebody else. But you could put like $3,579. Okay. What I'm going to tell you though is make sure that the maximum price kind of matches that. So if you say $3,579, you're not going to say with a max of $575. You're going to say a max of $578,575. $5,000, right? $579, right? So that you actually can make the math work. The amount that you are agreeing to beat the other offer is off of the net, not the gross. So if another offer says, well, I'll pay $550, but I want $10,000 back in closing costs, you're actually beating them off of $540, not $550, okay? Escalations also escalate off of each other. So if you have 3 offers that come in and they're 500, 505, and 510, but then they have escalation clauses, you don't look at 500, 505, and 510. You look at the max on their escalations, right? So you look to see how you can play them all off of each other. So if you have escalations then that go to 550, 560, and 570, and yours is 570, then your winner is going to be the 570 offer, but it's going to be increased over the 560, okay? Because that was the second place offer. So it's however much they're willing to pay above that second place offer. Con, you have a question?
Yeah, just to clarify what you just said. So you can't have like a partial escalation, like say your escalation clause is like increments of 5,000 or something, and you, like whatever the amount that you put to the maximum is or whatever, like say like you could go up another 2,500, but you would like with your top or whatever, you would not be able to actually fully go up by another 5,000. Would you lose then, or?
Right, so what you're filling in here is the absolute maximum that they're willing to pay.
But there can't be like the increments of the escalation, can they not be, does it have to be by that increment or?
Okay, so it will be by that increment, but if offer number 1 is beating offer number 2 and it's less than the full increment, that's okay. So if you said that you were going to escalate 5,000 above the next offer, but the next offer was only 2,000 less than yours, then you're only paying 2,000 more because you're only going to what your cap is. You're paying up to that amount of money.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. So there's 2 choices when it comes to appraisal: retains and waives. Okay, it's very clear in here that VA and FHA financing, you cannot check waives appraisal. When you're doing an escalation clause, make sure that you have had a conversation with your client about appraisal, right? It doesn't make sense if all the comps come in at 500,000 and you say I'm willing to pay 575 and you retain your appraisal contingency. A good listing agent is going to be like, well, that's ridiculous. They just want to win because they put a high number down and then they want to negotiate with us later. Like, we need to, you know, talk about that appraisal gap guarantee or, you know, something else. Now, this section here is where I get a lot of heartburn, because this is where you actually fill in the winning price. The escalation addendum is only executed with the ratified contract if the winning offer has the highest price, okay? If the winning offer does not have the highest price, then you remove the escalation addendum and you do a counter offer on page 1, okay? So I see regularly where the escalated price is some number, right? And like 500, and then the offer that they've beat, which the terms have to be filled into this box to show who the offer is that they beat, will say something like the sale price and the net are 525. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Our winning offer didn't beat the next offer by anything. So the escalation clause is actually not what won them the offer. It was some other term in the contract. Now, maybe they still had to increase their price, right, as part of the negotiations, but it wasn't the escalation that won them the contract. So only when you're using the escalation addendum to take them to the highest price above offer number 2, does this get used. Everything else is done as a counteroffer situation. And it does happen where somebody else's offer has better terms. And so you might not, money isn't everything. It's a lot, but it's not everything. Sometimes the terms are what can win it, okay? The other piece to this is that if you use the escalation addendum, you have to include the full copy of offer number 2, not page 1, not with things redacted. It is a full copy of offer number 2 to justify why you increased the price for this contract. Now, what I will tell you is that it is a good practice if you are working with another offer that has not won because of price and you want to push them up to their top escalation, that you still send them what the highest offer is that you received, because you're showing in good faith that you have countered at this higher price because you had higher offers. I still do think it's good practice to do that, but it's not necessary like it is with this addendum that you send the copy of the full offer. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Escalation clauses are tough with buyers because you're showing the buyer's hand. There's nothing that prevents a seller who has no other offers on the table from saying, I'll take your offer right now if you go up to your escalated price. So it's a negotiation tool when there's multiple offers, but sometimes you don't know if there's multiple offers up front and it shows their hand. Okay. All right, so does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Seller's post-settlement occupancy agreement. Okay. This is not a landlord-tenant situation. This is a holdover occupant where the seller is still responsible fully for the home as if they have not sold it. I want to be clear that if the HVAC breaks 3 days into the post-settlement occupancy agreement, they don't get to call the buyer and say, the air conditioner broke. They actually get to call an HVAC company and have them come out and fix it and pay for it. All right. Sellers need to understand this when they ask for a post-settlement occupancy. So the first paragraph talks about the cost. In the market right now, we see a lot of free post-settlement occupancy. When the market shifts, we see more of either a flat fee, not as often, but the most that we see is where the buyer's actual costs are charged to the seller. Okay, so it's calculated based off of their principal, interest, taxes, and insurance and HOA fees or condo fees, and it's prorated, so it's a per diem charge. So whatever the cost is to the buyer is passed on to the seller. That's what we see the most. If you're offering a free rent back right now and it's 0, what you would do is check the box that says a flat fee in the amount of and write 0. Okay, that's the option that you would choose. You would not strike out the paragraph. You wouldn't do any of that. You would simply check the box and write 0. The second paragraph in there talks about how it's not a landlord-tenant relationship. Okay. Occupancy deadline. The maximum time frame allowed in post-settlement occupancies is 60 days. This is because owner occupants are signing an affidavit at closing stating that they intend to occupy this property as their primary residence within 60 days. So this is a lender requirement. So it can be a maximum of 60 days. Every once in a while, a VA purchaser can get a waiver and have it be longer, but it has to be an extenuating circumstance. In this paragraph, it says what day the deadline is and will the buyer refund any unused portion of the occupancy charge if they leave early. So if a buyer says that they're going to stay for 60 days, or a seller says to the buyer they're going to stay for 60 days, that full 60 days worth of money is paid at closing. It's credited to the buyer at closing. But if the seller leaves after 30 days, there's a choice on whether or not the seller gets that extra 30 days worth of money back or not. In most cases, the answer is will not get back, because that buyer had to make plans to be out of that new home for the full 60 days, and likely they have costs associated with it. So generally it's will not refund. The default paragraph says that if the seller does not move out on time before the occupancy deadline, that it will be double the daily rate based on what you put in the top paragraph. But if it's 0, because you're giving it for free, you have to fill in a number in that second box. And so I suggest something that is no less than $250 a day. You do not want it to be cost effective for a seller to stay, right? You want it to actually be a penalty. Property maintenance and condition. This is where it's important that we are reviewing that it's not a landlord-tenant situation. The property must be delivered in substantially the same condition as of the date of settlement. So if the buyer does not do a walkthrough before closing, there is no proof of what the condition was at settlement, and the buyer has 0 claim to any security deposit. So if you have a buyer who is doing post-settlement occupancy, allowing the seller to stay, make sure that they still do a walkthrough, because they have no proof of what the condition was at closing if they never went and did a walkthrough. Well, they would do a walkthrough, yes, after the property is vacated. A security deposit to be held with the escrow agent, the title company that's subtracted from the proceeds, is not meant to be a money-making activity for the buyer. It's not meant to replace things that were old and they didn't get to negotiate during the contract. So if the HVAC system is 15 years old, they don't get to use the security deposit to say, oh, well, the HVAC, isn't working right, and try to charge for replacement. This is for damage. This is for if they're a holdover tenant, right, or holdover occupant. It's not supposed to be a lot of money. So how do you figure out how much money it is? It should be something that is commensurate with how long they're staying and the size of the home, because obviously a larger home can have more damage, right? So a condo where someone's staying for 60 days might have a $2,500 deposit, right? Where a 6,000 square foot home that they're staying for 60 days might have a $5,000 deposit. This is not meant to be something that is going to be used as a penalty, okay? Yes. So that's not what, so I don't use rents to base that at all, because it's meant to be for any damage that's caused, or if they're a holdover. So it's not meant for anything rent related. It's simply based on what damage could they cause while they're living there. It's the risk, right? And rent isn't really commensurate with the risk, right? So what this says is that after the occupancy deadline or when they vacate, right, the buyer has 3 days to do that final walkthrough and send a list of deficiencies to the escrow agent and of course to the seller, saying, hey, these are all the things that were wrong and we have a claim against your security deposit. We need to work this out, right? That if the escrow agent does not receive a list of the deficiencies so that they know there's a claim against the deposit, if they haven't heard anything, the escrow agent is allowed to just release that deposit back to the seller. Most will not without hearing from both parties. However, they can. It is right here in the contract that directs them to release it. Okay. Utilities will be kept in the seller's name until the occupancy deadline or the agreement for when they're vacating. And the risk of loss, this is the part of the document that was in the update for July 1 to clarify that the buyer's homeowner's insurance policy, their hazard insurance policy, covers acts of God and the big things, and the seller's policy should be switched over to the equivalent of a renter's policy to cover the things on the inside of the house, right? So there are many insurance companies right now that actually are getting with the times, and there's a rider that can be added to the buyer's policy when they get the homeowner's policy that says that there's a post-settlement occupancy situation. So they finally figured out that this happens a lot, so that it's not a full equivalent of a fire policy, but it's similar, okay? Because the buyer doesn't occupy it. So everybody still has to have insurance. Access to the property, one set of keys is provided to the buyer at closing because, well, it's their house, right? And it says here that if it's going to be listed for rent, that the buyer and their agent can start listing it and showing it within 30 days of the deadline of the post-settlement occupancy. So if they're in for 30 days, then nobody gets to come in and show it, whatever. But if it's 60 days and 30 days in, they can do it. The buyer does not get to just come in whenever they want to measure for things and check for things and whatever. It's still the seller's home, essentially, when it comes to possession. Other terms, don't write other terms unless we talk to each other. Yep. Oh, great question. So Ron asked a great question. What is the role of the realtor in a post-settlement occupancy? So if anyone was on Ask the Broker last Friday, then you heard me beat this to death last Friday on Ask the Broker. I think we talked for 20 minutes about this last Friday. The agent's role officially is none in the post-settlement occupancy. Our agency agreement ends at settlement. Now, our relationship with the client does not end at settlement, right? So how often do we get calls, right, after settlement? Every single time. So here's the Reader's Digest version of my guidance from last week. We're setting expectations at the time the offer is being reviewed. That during the post-settlement occupancy period, the buyer and the seller communicate with each other. They do not communicate through the agents. The agents are not the gatekeepers anymore. Buyer and seller communicate with each other. If they have questions, of course, they can come to you. That's fine. But you are not the gatekeeper and you are not making decisions. You are reminding them what the document says, right? This is very important because your E&O insurance does not cover you for anything you do outside of that agency relationship. Okay, so when you are talking to them about the post-settlement occupancy and anything that happens or any dispute or anything like that, they're not actually your client. You are not in the transaction because our agency agreement ended at closing. So be very careful. It's just like talking to somebody random on the street, right? I have no doubt. Yes, okay. FERPTA addendum. So this is the addendum that goes with the contract if the seller identifies himself as a foreign person for tax purposes. So it talks about the 15% of the sale price that has to be withheld. The verbiage is very clear that it says the buyer is required to withhold 15% of the sale price on behalf of the seller if the sale price exceeds $1 million. If the sale price is less than $1 million, then it can be 10%. Okay, this is the sale price. This is not of their profit or proceeds. This is of the sale price. So the IRS is not a group of dummies, and they realize that they can make it the buyer's responsibility because the seller might, you know, leave town because they're a foreign person, right? Which means they're the legal resident of some other country. So that's that addendum. Buyer's acknowledgement of potential adverse consequences. I do believe I touched on this last week in the buyer consultation day. This document is that CYA document that you would have your client sign when you're preparing the offer that says you've talked about what could happen if they waive their financing contingency, if they waive their rate on contingency, if they offer to pay an appraisal gap guarantee, if it's sight unseen, anything, right? This is the CYA document that requires your client to sign acknowledging that you've spoken about whatever boxes you check on here. Okay, it's one additional layer to cover you that they can't come back and say later, you never told me I could lose my earnest money deposit, or you never told me that if the home didn't appraise, I was going to have to pay the difference, right? Because they're signing this document and you're explaining it to them saying, okay, we've talked about this, I need you to sign this. So you're sending this to them to acknowledge while you're preparing the offer. Okay, it's not with the offer, it's before. Buyer offer cover sheet. I see some weird things out there on cover sheets, things that agents are saying about their clients that they have no earthly idea about. Like how well qualified they are for the mortgage and how their credit is and how their employment's stable and like all of these things. I'm like, you don't know, right? So I encourage you to not embellish, to not write cover letters like that. Certainly in your email that you send, it's, you know, as promised, here's the offer we talked about. I look forward to working with you, blah, blah, blah. Make friends, don't embellish, right? This offer cover sheet we put into place at NVAR and Forms Committee so that we could discourage those letters, right? Also, I just saw Laura say love letters. Dear seller love letters are not allowed with offers, period. Period. Like no ifs, ands, or buts. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, how do you handle it? So when there's a dear seller love letter and you're on the listing side, my suggestion is before that ever comes, you have in your listing in the agent comments that letters to the seller will not be presented. And you've talked to your seller and you can put it in the listing agreement in the additional terms that seller, dear seller love letters or whatever you want to call them will not be presented. You have it in writing somewhere that you have agreed that this is not going to happen, right? This is our policy at the direction of the Virginia Association of Realtors and the National Association of Realtors. So I do not like it when I have to approve a contract that comes in for compliance review that has the picture of your buyer and the letter about all of these things that they do in their life, right? It actually makes me very nervous because now I'm clicking approve and I don't actually approve of what happened, okay? So those letters cannot go. They're fair housing violations. I understand that in a time they worked, and when they don't work, you're in big trouble. So just put it out there up front that they're not being presented. Yeah, you do remove them and you remind the agent that you're not sending them, that they're fair housing violations and that Virginia and NAR said no, so we follow that. Yeah, absolutely, they get removed. So this cover sheet is for the summary of your offer so that it goes right on top. It's just the summary of what your offer is. At the bottom, there is a place for the agent, you as the buyer's agent, to request that the listing agent confirm that they have presented this. There have been situations where an agent doesn't feel that their client's offer has been presented. We cannot require proof from the seller that they have reviewed, rejected, anything like that. It is part of the code of ethics that if we ask, they have to respond whether or not it's been presented. So if an agent says, yes, I presented it, and we find proof that they haven't, then they could be brought to the board and found guilty of a code of ethics violation, which can be a monetary penalty for them. So if you want the agent to respond and say, yes, I've presented it, then this is where they would sign and send back this cover page. Okay. Yes, Laura.
If you have a client who's submitting an offer and they want it to expire, they don't want it to stop or whatever, where now?
Oh, great question. Laura asked, where do you put when an offer expires? Because we took away the additional terms. So we took away the other term section for lots of reasons, including that one. Offers don't expire. So the document that we submit in an offer has terms in it that are only binding once everyone signs. So putting in that an offer expires doesn't do anything because it's only binding if everybody signs, and they're not going to sign, right? Because the idea is that the offer should go away. So the proper way to have an offer expire, if you will, you can certainly put in your email that you send that the buyer will withdraw their offer if not responded to or not ratified by a certain date. And then the first page of the contract, you would put an X through. In DocuSign, you can do a red X and write withdrawn and have your client initial and send that over at the time that they want the offer to be withdrawn. So offers don't expire. So that was one thing that was coming up a lot in that other term section that wasn't binding. And so we wanted that removed. Okay, so that's it for the offer documents. Yes, Laura.
Where can you find the buyer offer cover sheet? And then also a lot of listing agents will have that writing an offer info sheet that has everybody's info on
It's
it.
all in DocuSign.
I'm trying to find it. Is it under
NVAR Forms Library? Yep, everything's in there. And in our, in the template packs that we have set up, a lot of it's in there as well. In the like Virginia listing package, Virginia contract package, those they should be in there as well, but all of those are in the NVAR Forms Library. Yeah. Okay, questions on what we just went over before we hit post ratification documents? Yes, no? Okay. Awesome. I'm just clicking through and I see lots of cameras off. You guys know what that means. I had somebody who had their camera off who stayed on with me an hour yesterday after class. So there's a reason that I want to have your cameras on. I am not new. Okay, so I'll give you guys just a second to pull up those post ratification documents. Which one are you looking for? Right here. That's okay. This one's right here. Okay, everybody ready for those wonderful friends of mine that have had their cameras on this whole time? I love you. Give me a thumbs up if you have if you're ready with today's material. We good? Okay, awesome. Thank you, thank you. Okay, Orlando, you have a question. Oh, you raise your hand because you're good. Awesome. I was like, he's got to be ready. He was here early. He helped me do sound check and everything. All right. So addendum-sale. So this one is actually a follow-up, Laura, to your question about where do we put things when we used to have the additional terms, right? So another reason, not just to prevent the expirations, was that agents were writing things in the additional terms that they wanted to supersede an addendum. And so there could have been confusion about terms that were put in, and then there was an addendum. And we all know from contract law, right, that an addendum supersedes the main document. Okay. So we wanted to make sure there was no confusion at all. And so we took that out so that if there's a term that you want to supersede an addendum, it goes in another addendum. An example is the Appraisal Gap Guarantee. The Appraisal Gap Guarantee was put in the additional terms. Well, that's awesome, except you would have an appraisal contingency that was in an addendum that then maybe negated that appraisal gap, okay? So if your buyer is offering the appraisal gap, you're going to put the language that I've provided to everyone, which I can repost on the Facebook group. If you don't have it, you're going to put that on this addendum, and that's going to go after your financing and appraisal contingency document. All right. Anything that you have that's a term that Pam, it's called day 5 in the Google Drive. Here is the link again. Okay. So anything that a buyer and seller are agreeing to that changes a term in the contract goes on an addendum. So this is something that requires mutual agreement, mutual consent, anything like that. This can go with your offer, or this can be post ratification. Okay, in most cases, this is post ratification. We try to stick with the basics in the offer, and then this would be something that changes post ratification. One of the most common things that will go on an addendum of sale that I request is a name correction, because it'll come through, and when I'm reviewing for compliance, I see in the tax record that the home is owned in a trust or an LLC or something, and that's not how the contract is written. So I will send back and say, hey, we need an addendum for XYZ. A settlement date change goes on an addendum. A price change goes on an addendum. Okay, any of those basic things that are on pages 1 through 11 of the contract that get changed go on an addendum. Okay. These are most of the time something that I need to see in compliance. So you're going to add those to compliance because if a name changes or a settlement date changes or the price changes, basically anything that affects the ALTA statement not matching the original contract is the rule of thumb. Okay, it's what I need to see on the addendum. Contingencies and things like that have their separate documents, which I'm going to show you. So these again are the basics from that pages 1 through 11. A notice is a unilateral communication where one party tells the other something. It doesn't have to be agreed to. It's just one party telling the other something. You will very rarely use the general contract notice. There's very few times that that's necessary. The contract notice would be used if you're changing settlement agent, because there doesn't have to be an agreement of that. You would send unilateral communication that that's what's happening. If you're voiding the contract using a notice, there's a special document for that, which I'll show you. So most of the time, when there's something happening in the contract that's general, if you will, it's an addendum, not a notice. Okay, so you put buyers and sellers' names, the address, you fill in what's being agreed to, buyer and seller sign. Super easy. notice. Yes. Well, there's not an issue if the addendum's written properly. So if you're adding a buyer to the contract, it's not just that you're adding XYZ buyer to the contract. You actually have to state that the buyer agrees to all the terms in the document that was ratified on XYZ day. And then you're fine. Acknowledgement they actually are agreeing to the terms. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Okay, so on the notice, it's whatever is being told, and then you check the box of who is giving the notice, right? If the buyer is serving the notice, then you check the box buyer. I'm telling you, I'm changing the settlement agent. Okay, appraisal contingency notice. This is, all right, I'm going to say two things. The first thing I'm going to say is that at the bottom of this page, you're going to see where it says 121 is the last revision. There is a revision for July of 2022, but it doesn't actually affect anything that you see on this document. You probably won't even know what the difference is. And so instead of me creating a whole new packet for this one document, I just printed the packet that we used at the beginning of the year. So I just want to tell you that when you see, if you pay attention to the dates at the bottom of the document starting in July, there will be a new document, but it doesn't actually affect you. Okay. This appraisal contingency notice is the document that we talked about yesterday that is actually how you do something with that appraisal contingency once the appraisal comes in. So this is what would be delivered with the copy of the appraisal if you need to ask for the price to be changed, if you're voiding the contract, you know, those types of things. So the choices are here, the 5 choices. So this is used for conventional, VA, FHA, USDA, it doesn't matter. All of them are on here. You can check the box that says the appraisal is equal to or greater than the sale price, and we're moving forward. Everything's good. The second one is that the buyer elects to move forward without regard to the appraisal, right? So this is one where it appraises low, and they're like, you know what, we're still going to move forward. We're going to pay the difference, right? We talked about that example yesterday. Option 3 was where the appraisal value is where it's supposed to be, but there's something else wrong with the collateral that doesn't allow the lender to move forward with the loan because of the appraisal. Okay, so then that one is dead. Appraisal is less than the sale price and buyer elects to negotiate, right? That's where you put the sale price that the buyer is asking you for, and you include an addendum saying buyer and seller agree to new sale price of X. That's how the negotiation occurs. Negotiation doesn't occur on this document. It would occur on the addendum, okay? In the negotiation period, remember, there's a negotiation period in your appraisal contingency that says, okay, we can go back and forth for 3 days to come to an agreement. And if not, then I can walk away. And then with the last one, it's that, you know what, it didn't appraise and I don't want to deal with it anymore. I'm just walking away. And in those last 3, you have to attach something, right? You have to attach either the denial or notice from the lender that the collateral doesn't work, or you have to attach the appraisal. And then the buyer signs this document. Remember, I pointed out yesterday, there's no place for the seller. This is unilateral communication. Buyer is telling seller something about the appraisal. Another time that you might use the notice document is if you were seller, in the very rare occasion, wants to deliver notice to the buyer to remove their financing contingent, or that their financing contingency will be removed if they don't void, or if they want to serve notice that they can void or the appraisal contingency, right? So those, but again, very rarely does a seller want to risk it if things are moving along and it's just a delay. Inspection Contingency Removal Addendum. So this is the document that would be used if you have a buyer with a contingency to negotiate for repairs on well and septic, radon, home inspection. This is what the document is that you use, and you check the box for what contingency you're negotiating. I'd like you all to look at the size of this box right here. I want you to know there's a reason for that. Our home inspection is not meant to change the condition of the home. Okay, it's not meant for us to negotiate to change the condition of the home. It's meant to teach the buyer how to love the home and take care of the home. It's meant to check for things that might not be working that were advertised to be working in working order. We do not negotiate for things that a buyer knew about when they made the offer. So if a buyer knew that there was a crack in the driveway as they walked up the driveway to see the house at the open house, and then walked down the driveway, and then walked back up the driveway to go in the house for the showing with their agent, and then walked back down the driveway, resealing the driveway and fixing the crack is not what goes on the home inspection contingency, because they knew it had a crack and the offer should be made based on the condition of the property. This is for things that are systems that are not working, that were advertised to be working. This is for safety issues like electrical, right? If you don't know that there's a double tap in the electrical panel, or some fire hazard with wiring or something that you don't know about, or something that could cause damage to the home while the homeowner still owns it, like a leak in the roof, okay? Those are things that are appropriate to be on this document, nothing else. So I don't want to see caulk the bathtub or install missing screens or, you know, those types of things. That's not appropriate, right? The screens were missing when you made the offer. Okay, does that make sense to everybody?
No, you said if something was advertised, where it was just no mention.
Well, then it's advertised to be working if there's no mention of it, right? Right, yeah. So if they say, like the microwave, right? And we go to test the microwave and the microwave's not working, or the burners on the stove don't turn on, right? Like nobody said it wasn't working. And so you're making the offer with the assumption that these appliances are in normal working condition, right? Then you could ask for those to be repaired. So I love you. You know what? Maybe I need to go on a tour for teaching home inspection contingency attendants, because I do feel like this is a big challenge in the market, especially now that we're shifting. Like for a while, we didn't have home inspections, right? In these contingencies, and we're getting back to it. So I think this might need to be something we talk about a lot.
So how do you educate the buyer's agent when you're the listing agent that they already knew that that was the condition of the home?
So you have that conversation when they send over the HICRA, and you pick up the phone and you call them. Now, when they send over this ridiculous list, right? We don't want to be the one that gets in the way and makes a decision on behalf of our clients. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pick up the phone and we're going to call the agent and say, hey, Jane Smith, you know, this is Shannon Lauderstein. I got the HICRA and I got the report and I reviewed it. Thank you very much for sending it over. I wanted to talk to you about a couple of items on it, so I had more information before I present it to my seller. And then you ask about those items that are silly, right? Like replacing the screens. You say, you know, the screens, I just wanted to understand because the screens were never on the property to begin with. So why is that important to your buyer, right? Or why is it important that we recaulk the bathtub? you know, paying someone to come recaulk the bathtub because that's what's required in this addendum might be a little much if they want us to have, you know, the HVAC serviced and, you know, whatever. So talk to me about why this is important. And you're going to get a lot of information in that conversation. You're going to get either the agent tried to explain all of that to their buyer and they weren't having it and they just wanted to have everything put on the list. You're going to get an answer that says, oh, I didn't realize we weren't supposed to ask for those things. That's fine. Just have your seller counter with whatever it is they're comfortable doing. Or you're going to get something like, my buyer is not handy at all and they're very nervous. And if your seller can handle any of these things, they probably would be amenable to it with them doing it themselves and not paying somebody, right? So you're going to get an idea for what's happening. Most of the time, it's not an agent on the other side that's trying to be sneaky or shady when it comes to this stuff. It's that they truly don't understand, or they're not communicating very well about what their buyer's true need is. They're not going to do it in an email. They're not going to put it in writing. You have to pick up the phone and call them. So when you present it to your seller, because you've already set the expectations that these are the things you have to do if they come up on the home inspection, right? We talked about this last week, that I already set the expectation that you're going to fix these things if they come up. You say to your seller now, listen, I talked to the buyer's agent and I know we weren't expecting these things, but they told me that the buyer was really nervous about XYZ, or the buyer owned a house previously and this thing went wrong. And so now they're really on heightened alert to whatever this thing is, right? So you're seeking first to understand. And if it's not a big deal to your seller, then it's not a big deal to your seller. Right? So we don't have to make it adversarial. And when we do that, then if the seller says, no, I just can't do it, then we come back to that agent. We've already built the rapport so that we can teach them that, you know, I already had set the expectations with my seller that they had to do these certain things because that's what's in the contract. So they're really not in a position to take care of these other things. And it's not just, you know, crossing it out and sending it back and having no discussion. So it's one of the most important in contract conversations you can have is when you get the ridiculous wish list. And you aren't going to be that agent that sends the ridiculous wish list, because you will have set the expectation with your buyer up front that we're not asking for those things. And so you're not going to get the reputation in the market for being that person.
When results of an inspection really just hit on, let's say, the crack practice area, things that you would have seen managers bill by the seller, and there's, you know, nothing like that. Can the buyer still void the contract based on the results of the inspection?
So the buyer can void based on the results of the inspection if you don't come to an agreement, but they can void even if there's nothing wrong on the inspection. Correct. It says the buyer's sole discretion, which means there could be nothing that comes up wrong on that inspection, but they've done the inspection and they've gotten buyer's remorse and they say, you know what, I can't. I'm afraid to be a homeowner now that I've been shown about the water shutoff and that I have to, you know, winterize the pipes outside and like all of this stuff. It's too much. I can't do it. Right. So there's two questions that in the chat. One is about things like improper drainage that are causing foundation problems. Well, so that's something that you're not going to know really when you're walking through that it's the drainage causing, you know. So you can also, if there is evidence in the home inspection that maybe there is foundation issues, hopefully your home inspection is done early enough in your time frame that you can get a structural engineer out there or somebody else for that additional inspection, because all of the inspections happen during that period. If you can't, then you try to negotiate with the seller to extend that time period for the inspection so that you can have more information before you negotiate. crawl spaces. So crawl spaces are tough because I think sometimes it depends on the inspector, like what they say about the crawl space. And a pristine crawl space, like where you could go and, eat dinner down there laying on the floor, I don't think is necessary. I think that there are certain things from moisture and that kind of thing that are necessary, and crawl spaces are not something that most of us are going into when the offer is made on the house. And so I do think that something having to do with the crawl space, like if additional moisture is detected and those types of things, that's reasonable. Just like you're not going in the attic, right? So if there's a roof leak and you can see the evidence in the attic, but like you can't see that there's evidence outside that there's an issue with the roof, that's the same thing. We're not like going in all the nooks and crannies during that.
I would say just from a personal lesson learned that if you have a buyer with a crawl space, I still recommend taking a peek under there, visible, because I've seen some pretty wicked stuff under crawl spaces, like entire HVAC AC units in a crawl space.
Yes.
The home, or it's just a dirt floor, which means you probably have a good weight on it. Exposure costs, the barrier.
Yeah, like yeah. Sometimes the HVAC system's in the crawl space. Sometimes, there's no floor barrier between. So yeah, if you can peek in, that would be good. Laura, you have a question?
Just curious, how do you recommend, say, a buyer asking for or a seller offering credit in lieu of?
Oh, excellent. So if you have a picky buyer, I say don't ever ask for things to be fixed. Always ask for money. Always ask for money. Because it's not up to the buyer how things are fixed or who fixes them. And that can be a little bit of an issue at the final walkthrough, is they're not happy with how something is fixed, right? Because again, the seller wants to save as much money as they can, and the buyer wants it to be done, with gold plates. So on this document, what I would say is that you would reference seller to provide credit to buyer at closing, the amount of X, see attached addendum. Because this document doesn't go to the lender. A sales contract addendum goes to the lender, right? So then the attached addendum says seller subsidy now blank, because there might have been some sort of subsidy to begin with. Now keep that in mind as we shift into the new market, is that there is a cap on how much money a seller can give a buyer, okay? A VA buyer can get a little bit more money than what the closing costs are. But the other types of loans do not allow a buyer to get a credit for more than what their closing costs are. So they cannot make money, cash, right, above what their costs are. So if you have already asked for 2.5% of a credit and gotten it on the offer, you are not likely going to be able to get more money unless your client's going to buy down their rate with that additional credit and incur more costs for closing. So always check with the lender if you started out with a credit or your credit's going to be a substantial amount. Double check with the lender on how much money is available for a credit. And the credit is from all parties. So that means like if there was a broker credit or a credit from the seller or a credit from the lender, whatever, it's a total credit from all parties, cannot exceed that amount.
So let's say there's a sales subsidy at 2%. I'm dealing with that right now.
Yeah.
And you get to towards settlement, you also prepare it on, you find out buyer's closing costs actually were a little less than 2%. I see that lower. What happens?
Okay, so what happens if you negotiate 2% as the credit and the buyer's closing costs are less? So there's money on the table. What happens? Well, sometimes the money gets left on the table. If you have a good lender, the lender is going to find ways to use that credit by prepaying HOA or condo fees. They might offer to, a buy down on the rate, tell you what the cost is on it. They're going to look for things that they can add at closing that can be paid for by the seller. You can do 2 years of a home warranty. There are certain allowable things that can go on to eat up the rest of the credit. And sometimes an agent negotiates too much of a credit and there is money left on the table. So yeah, so again, talking to the lender is really important to know what the closing costs would be. Yep. The bottom of this document says that a full copy of the inspection report has to be attached. Okay, so even if you're asking for money, you still have to send the report. It also says that if you're asking for repairs, that a licensed contractor who is licensed to do the type of work that is asked for is who's doing the work. So you're not going to have a plumber come in and do the electrical work, right? You're not going to have just a handyman coming in and servicing the HVAC, okay? That's what this says. What this also says is the clarification that your inspector can come in with you on your final walkthrough to check the items that were negotiated here. If you did not have an inspection and you did not negotiate for items to be repaired, then the inspector does not get to come with you at the final walkthrough. It is only the agent and their buyer. Okay? Yes, Laura.
So just to clarify, if you are going to also ask for money as the buyer, should you put the list of here's what we were going to ask for?
No. Nope. Unless you want them to choose, but I don't know that letting them choose is the right idea. I think you decide, I want them to fix everything and these are the things, or I want money, but the buyer chooses. No.
Why?
No, because you're giving them a full copy of the report. So they can figure out, you know, what the deficiencies were. Notice voiding contract. So this is the document that you would use if your client decides, like on the home inspection, hey, we don't want to negotiate. There was too much, or they don't have the right to negotiate and there was too much on there for them to move forward. And they say, you know what, we're done. We need out. So this document gets filled out where it says the undersigned party gives written notice to who? Okay, so the undersigned party in most cases is the purchaser, and they're giving notice to the seller, right? There's one option, right? The EMD time where the seller can kill the deal. The notifying party hereby declares the contract void, permitted pursuant to what paragraph of the contract, right? So are they voiding on HOA docs, right? Paragraph 8, right? You just say paragraph 8 of the contract and then sign at the bottom, voiding on HOA docs. If it's home inspection, then it's going to be paragraph 1 of home inspection contingency addendum, or paragraph 2 now, because we added the first thing, right? So it's, you know, paragraph 2A gives me the right to void on whatever, right? Or if it's financing contingency, it's whatever the paragraph is that you've chosen, right? If they got declined, right? I'm delivering notice to void based on my contractual right to do so. And I'm telling you which paragraph to go look at to double check that I'm allowed to kill the deal, right? That's what this says, okay? With this document, the release of sales contract and deposit goes. So first you're killing the deal, and then everybody's agreeing to the earnest money deposit going back to the purchaser. Okay, when the contract is void, it means everybody goes back to their position prior to the contract being ratified, which means the buyer gets their money back and no one has further obligation. So the release of sales contract and deposit always goes with a notice to void and whatever other documentation has to be provided, right? Sometimes you have to provide the home inspection report or the decline letter from the lender. This release can be done without those other documents. So you get to a point where you have no contingencies and you know your buyer's not getting to closing. And your buyer's like, look, I just need out. I don't want to default. I don't want to go through this whole thing. I want the seller to be able to put their house back on the market. I have $10,000 in earnest money deposit. let's negotiate, right? I'm going to offer them 5 if they give me 5 back and they can go back on the market, right? So this would be filled out where 5 goes to the purchaser, 5 goes to the seller. And it's a mutual agreement to release the contract. Nobody's voiding, right? They don't have the right. So what this whole thing says is that after executing this document, all parties release their ability to pursue the other party for any damages later. Everybody's contractual obligations are released and everybody goes on their merry way. Okay, so if the contract is released, nobody can take you to court and win because you've released the contract. There's a section D that says who's paying for the title appraisal survey, etc. It's generally the party who's asking for the release. Okay, so the buyer, right, is paying for these things in most cases. If the seller is trying to kill the deal for some reason, then you would say the seller, but in most cases, it's the buyer. All right, the last paragraph here, let me tell you, it's not easy to pursue this, but it's just the caveat says that just because the contract's being released does not mean your agents aren't owed money. So there still might be responsibilities in the brokerage agreement based on why this release is signed. So it's just putting them on notice that this kills the contract. It doesn't kill their responsibilities in the agency agreements. Okay. It's 1:30. Let's take a break. That was a lot, right? Okay. Let's do, I don't have that much today. So let's take 15 minutes. Let's take 15 minutes, come back at 12 minutes. Come back at 1:40, okay? Yep. So there's a question about what our Facebook page is, and I just want to take the chance to remind everybody that we are not Keller Williams United. We are KW United. There isn't a thing that's Keller Williams United. So that's another thing that stresses me out when I see documents and email signatures and things that say Keller Williams United, because it's actually going to get the agents in trouble if they use Keller Williams United, because it doesn't match your license. We are KW United dash whatever the market center is, or you can just use KW United by itself with Keller Williams Realty, but not Keller Williams United. So that might be what the issue is on this one. Okay, yep. So we have several different ones. So there's City Office has one, and then there's a listing and broker one. So there's several different ones, but the Foster Stevens one is the internal one. And then there's an external one that's just KW United. So each office has an internal one. Okay. And then I have one that's called listing and broker forum. So it's like where I post things. And then like I post reminders about the broker. People can post their listings or buyer needs or things like that. So it's the one page for all three market centers, so that like I have one place that I can communicate with everybody, but listing needs and buyer needs and those types of things can be communicated across all three.
What's the name of that one?
KW United Listing and Broker Forum. So on your new on your welcome emails that you get when you join, there's a whole list of Facebook pages. I'm on it. Yeah, so if you've been here for a while, so you don't have like one of the new welcome emails, just let us know and we can get you hooked up with those. We can also send invites if we're friends with you on Facebook. So if I'm not friends with you on Facebook, then I can't invite you. It doesn't connect. But if you want to send me a friend request on Facebook, then like you can follow all of my time that I travel for hockey or go chase the queen or whatever. Like sometimes there's fun stuff. Then I can send you an invite to join those pages also. All right. Everybody have a nice break. Okay. Any questions from what we zoomed through earlier? Anybody learn anything from that part? Laura says yes. I love that because Laura's been doing business a long time. So it is validity for me when I can teach something to someone who's been around for a little while. All right, questions, concerns, anything before we get into the rest of it? I do want to let you guys out early today and give time for any questions or anything. So if there's no questions, we're gonna keep going. Okay, let's go. Buyer's limited access to premises agreement. So this is a document that you would use in the event that we talked about yesterday where the buyer wants to do the repairs, right, for that the lender requires because the seller's not going to. This is also something that you would use to give the buyer the opportunity to come in for something a little more extensive, like not just, hey, can I come measure for blinds, right? Like, can I come and spend a long time in there with my contractors and this and that? Like the buyer's gonna hang out and the agent's not going to be there with them, right? This is giving the buyer the opportunity to be there and have the contractors come in and out. This also would be used in the event that like the buyer's pod is being delivered before settlement and they need to have it, they get permission to have it delivered to the driveway. Sometimes a seller will give permission to have things put in the garage. I don't like it, but it happens. And so you would use this document for that, okay? This next document is the walkthrough inspection document. So this document ties back to the condition and maintenance paragraph of the main contract. That paragraph says that the property will be delivered in substantially the same condition as of either date of offer or date of home inspection. Remember, we went over the different scenarios about why what an unintended consequence might be of choosing one over the other, that you're not going to choose settlement date or anything like that. This is to check to make sure that things are just in working order and that there's no big damage, right? This is not to change the condition. This is not anything like this. This is supposed to be something quick. The final walkthrough is supposed to be something quick. You're also checking to make sure that the repairs were done if there was something that was negotiated on the HIC rack. So as a buyer's agent, as I'm walking through with my, actually, let me back up. As a listing agent, before this final walkthrough happens, I'm going to the property and I'm doing a walkthrough myself because I don't want the buyer and their agent to find something that I didn't know about. So I'm going to the house and I am looking for things as if I'm the buyer's agent. Because if I discover something, then I have a little more time to get it fixed and I can call and let the buyer's agent know, hey, I found XYZ, we're getting it taken care of. It's easier for them to stomach when they walk through, right? So what do we do during the walkthrough? So what I do during the walkthrough, and I don't really care what the buyer's doing, if they follow me around or not, when I do it, I want them to have the opportunity to do it, but I'm doing it for my own satisfaction. I'm flushing all the toilets. I'm turning on all the sinks and I'm looking under the cabinets. I'm turning the shower on. I'm pulling the diverter. I'm making sure hot water comes out. I'm turning the stove on. I'm checking the microwave. So I bring like a napkin or a paper towel or something and I put it in just to make sure that it gets hot. And it really, if it's working, it gets really hot. I am checking to make sure that the refrigerator and freezer are cold. I'm walking around and turning on all the lights that have, either ceiling fans or, making sure all the lights, because the light bulbs are supposed to be replaced before the settlement. I'll check to see if the filter was replaced in the HVAC. I'm checking to see like what the real status is of the property. I'm looking to see if there's any damage that wasn't there before. I'm doing that. The buyer's usually looking around and be like, oh, I want to put my sofa here and we're going to paint this room this and whatever, right? So then I'm having the conversation with them that, listen, I checked all of these things. If you want to check them, you can. And when you sign this document saying they're working, that's it. You don't get to come back on me. You don't get to come back on, right? Like this is it. So if you want to check it, check it. And if they want to check it, that's great. I let them go do it, right? But I've already checked it too. Same thing like if I'm working with a client, new construction, boy, those builders love me because the blue tape walkthrough, I get a roll of my own blue tape and I walk through separately because there's just things that I see that they don't. So you mark whether it's in substantially the same condition, yes or no, and NA is for something that doesn't exist, that never existed, right? So if there were no ceiling fans, you write NA. If there was no built-in microwave, you check NA. If it's there and it's working, you click yes, right? And you mark through all of those things. Any remarks would be for something that might not be working, right? Or needs to be addressed. Now, If everything's fine, only the buyer signs this. And you send a copy to the listing agent. If you're the listing agent, you want a copy of this for your records. It is a required document in command. I'm not going to hold up your commission because you don't submit this. And I really don't think it's a great idea for you to not submit it. So that's why it says required. Like, trust me, the fewer number of documents I have to look at, the better. Like, okay, I would much rather spend all of my time in a classroom and working one-on-one with you guys, but I have to spend time looking at contracts and documents too. If there's a discrepancy that needs to be addressed, it needs to be written up in these remarks. And then there are 3 choices on how that gets resolved. The seller will correct the discrepancies without an escrow. Seller will credit the buyer, whatever is agreed to, or the repairs will be made and paid from funds held in an escrow account held by the settlement agent. Escrow funds are or are not the limit of the seller's liability. So what that one means is that if they put $5,000 in the escrow account and it costs $7,000, if it is the limit of their liability, then all the seller has to pay is $5,000 and the buyer has to pay the other $2,000. If they put $5,000 in and it costs $7,000 and it's not the limit of their liability, then they have to pay the other $2,000. The seller has to pay the other $2,000. Okay, that's what that one means. Lenders always have to approve escrows. It's not very easy to get that approved. Check with the lender before you agree to this. Seller credit to the buyer, same thing. The lender has to agree to it. So if you think there's going to be something major, do a walkthrough, your first walkthrough a few days before so you can get it negotiated, and then do your final walkthrough the day of so you can get it through on the settlement statement properly. If you choose seller to correct discrepancies without an escrow, that's generally going to be something minor. Okay, so there's a couple of ways that that can happen. If there's like trash and debris or something on the outside of the house, then, you know, the seller can say, I'm going to come take care of it, whatever. Okay, the seller can also pay a contractor directly, which is not an escrow, right? So that's handling it outside of the escrow, and you can write in here, seller to pay 123 junk, provide me a receipt before I close that says, you know, they've paid $500, and so they, you know, whatever, right? So they can pay directly. We can get creative on things like that. None of these choices, none of them is buyer walks away. There's nothing in the contract that gives the buyer the ability to walk away if they are not happy with what the condition is at the walkthrough. Those are the choices. Now, obviously, you could come to an agreement, right? But the buyer can't deliver notice of void, okay? They can on HOA violations. Remember, there's a difference, but not on home inspection, okay? Okay, broker credit letter. So you all give away way too much of your money. Entirely too much of your money. The reason I've included this in here is because I need the opportunity whenever I can get it to remind us that the broker credits affect what we charge clients. Okay, so when we talked last week about coming up with on your listings, like what your fees are and things like that, we also talked about on our buyers, you know, what our fees are. We cannot charge different people different fees for the same service. And so when you start giving broker credits, if you're charging on a listing 2.5% on the listing side for whatever the services you're giving, and then you're giving one person a credit for $1,000 and another person a credit for $2,500 and another $5,000, well, guess what? You're now not charging the same thing for those services. Broker credits are meant to be for a situation where you're trying to save a deal, where like the clients can't get out of their own way sometimes. A broker credit is meant to be in a situation that is duplicatable. Okay, so if there's a situation where a buyer and seller are negotiating for home inspection items and you know, they're $1,000 apart. You're like, really, this is a $750,000 property and you can't figure out $1,000, you give that credit, right? Because you would give that credit on every single transaction to save it, right? If that's what it took. So that's duplicatable. If you are working with clients from like you're getting referrals from a specific area. So instead of paying referral fees, right? They ask you to give credits to the client instead, right? That's fine. That's duplicatable because that referral source, every deal is, you know, you're giving the credit to the client. Those are things that this is meant for. This is not just meant to be used when the client out negotiates you and you randomly give credits. Okay, so use this document sparingly. It is in DocuSign in the Office Documents folder. So it'll say KW-949, KW-478, KW-548. You fill it in and you send it to me. This is not meant for home warranties. We don't get broker credits for home warranties. Remember, we talked about you register it and you pay for it with your credit card. When you send me this broker credit, make sure that your compliance folders are approved. I don't sign these at all if we don't have paperwork, period, because I'm not signing a broker credit letter for someone who I don't know is our client. Like that's a no-go for me. But if we don't have approved paperwork, then I'm not going to sign it either. So if you are turning things in your timelines, right, in your 24 hours or 48 hours, then this won't really be an issue because you're asking for a credit generally towards the end of a transaction because something has come up, right? You might need it earlier on if there's a certain scenario, but for the most part, it's well after that time period where you would have submitted the paperwork. So some people who submitted their paperwork on Tuesday, I haven't looked at it yet because I've been with you guys. And I'll be reviewing over the weekend. So it may take me more than a couple of days after it's turned in, but for the most part, I'm trying to stay updated. I hate when the number ticks up for me every time somebody submits something and it's false because it'll say how many opportunities, not how many folders. So if somebody submits their buyer folder and their contract folder at the same time, then it's 2, but it only says 1 for me. And I hate when the number ticks up. So I want it 0 every day. So trust me, I try to look every day.
Hey, Shannon,
so yes.
On these credit letters, would this apply still for, don't really see it, right, haven't really seen it for a little while now, but like, you know, USAA, Navy Fed, they have, you know, you use their agent, they get their kickback. That's what I'm calling it. Yep. They won't call it that.
Right.
But we've worked with agents and we get the referral and we can use this for those, correct? Because that's duplicatable, right? For any USA, we can match that same fee. Would this be something?
This is it. And so you would put that in the buyer agreement that matching USAA's credit, right? You're not putting, you know, what it is or whatever, but it's, you know, USAA, you know, credit match or whatever you want to call it. So it's in the buyer agency agreement. So we've marked it ahead of time why we're doing this, and it is duplicatable. And then yes, the broker credit letter would be to give them the credit that they would have gotten from USAA agents, but they're getting better service from us. So that's actually a great example about the referral source, right? And it's the same letter I put on letterhead for all 3 market centers to make it easy. But it is in each of your folders. The other thing to just remember, in case you didn't know or aren't aware, broker credits come from your portion, not from off the top and not from us. Okay, so if you are giving away your money, then you may give away your money, but just think about it before you calculate how much money you're giving, right? Because you don't want to give, say you're going to give 50% of the commission when you're not getting 50% of the commission, right? So just think about that. Now, I will catch a lot of times cappers, I'll be honest, I don't double check usually. If you tell me you want to give away a certain amount of money, I trust that you have enough money to give away whatever money you're telling me you're giving away. But newer agents, I double check to see whether the agent's capped yet, what their split is, you know, if they've come out of the market center team yet so that they're on the 80-20 split. How much money do you have to give away? And if you're giving away more than what you're making, I'm going to send you a note. And I'm going to say, are you sure you want to give this money away? Right? Because when you're first starting out, you don't have that much disposable income to give away, right? So our cappers and our mega agents, I have to trust that if they make the mistake, they've got something else coming in after that's going to make up for it, right? I'd rather tell you guys ahead of time if you made a mistake, so you at least know before you think that closing happened and you're just getting this huge check and you're not. Okay. Yeah, I think USAA may have stopped on some of those referral sources. There's a lot of change that's happening with the with commissions and credits and who pays what because of the NAR and DOJ, and all these other lawsuits. So we talk about it maybe once a month and ask the broker. Extension of review period for condo resale certificate. Okay, so this is the document that I talked about yesterday, that if you need extra time to review the HOA docs or the condo docs, this is the document that everybody signs that says we're going to extend for however many days, up to 4 days is the extension, so that it's a total of a maximum of 7 days for the review period. So you can extend it for 2 days, and then it's a maximum of 5, or for the full 4. This can be submitted with your offer if your client has a unique situation where they know they're going to need more time to find out information once they get the documents. Maybe they have a home-based business. Maybe they want to build a pool or do some sort of construction, and they need more time to talk to the HOA to find out whether they can use the property the way that they intend. They might know up front that they need the full 7 days. In most cases, you don't know up front that you need the full 7 days. So this would be after ratification. Okay. Guess what? That's the last page. What are we going to do with all this time? So you're gonna read the documents, what you're going to do with all this time. So here's Monday is rentals. Okay. On Monday, we're going to go through everything rental. We're going to go through applications, agency agreements, lease, everything rental is going to be in those 4 hours. Okay, some of it's going to be quick to get through some of the documents because like the buyer agency and listing agreements look very similar to the regular agreements that we have. Over the weekend in the Google Drive, I am going to post 2 scenarios that I would like to have all of you create offers for me and send me offers. So this is kind of like the offer writing workshop I was going to do, and we haven't had time to do it. So we're going to do it as part of boot camp. So I'm going to put scenarios into that Google Drive, and from the information that I post, you will be creating an offer and submitting the offer to me. And I will be giving feedback to all of you on how you did with your offer, as if I'm the listing agent. Okay. Well, you'll see the scenario. Okay. So this is a real life practice that you're going to get feedback on. Okay. When we are able to do the writing workshop, which I'm probably not going to have time to put actually on the calendar until September, that workshop is going to be more of you all presenting offers to each other. So one will be the listing agent, one will be the buyer's agent, and then the other one will review it and give feedback, right? So we're practicing on both sides. But for right now, what I'd like to see is what you learned from me right now in this, okay? So those scenarios will be posted on the Google Drive, and I will send out the link to the Google Drive to everybody again, so that you have it. And that's what I use for these classes. Is just an easier place for me to keep all the documents instead of, you know, resending. And quite frankly, I'll be very honest, I don't get a lot of this done way ahead of time. And so when I can just pop it into the one link and you guys can just pull the documents, it does make it easier for me. Lucia, you have a question.
I do. And I apologize if you touched on it yesterday. I had to leave right at 4. So, and I haven't looked at the recording yet. But for when we talk about the appraisal and the financing contingency, and you show us like the one when they waive the financing contingency, but they keep the appraisal contingencies, the form that to use. Then my follow-up question to that was if they are VA or FHA, more specifically FHA buyer, and if they want to waive, even though FHA covers for them, if they still want to waive appraisal and financing contingency, what language should we use, if any, as an addendum to cover that?
So you don't actually need an addendum or language. You just mark is not contingent. However, with FHA, you need to get the amendatory clause from the lender and include that. You would mark other on that section where it says what documents are attached. You would mark other and you would put FHA amendatory clause, because the seller needs to sign that anyway at some point during the transaction. And then you're being transparent that, hey, you know, we're not going to negotiate, but the buyer has the right to void if it comes in low. So there's no addendum or language. That's just what you do, is you mark page 1 appropriately.
And can we use, so what there is an addendum language for like pay, like the appraisal gap, right? Like I know we have discussed that. Can we use, because we don't know what's going to be that appraisal gap. Essentially, it's all of it between the offer price and appraisal, right? That's what the buyer's really saying. They're willing to pay.
That's what they have to pay. If they have no appraisal contingency, then they have to pay the difference. Exactly. There is no appraisal gap language. If they want to limit their risk in how much they're paying when there's a shortfall, they have to maintain the appraisal contingency, the full appraisal contingency, and they write the appraisal gap. So they say, okay, I want the appraisal contingency because I want the right to negotiate, and I'm not going to ask you to reduce your price less than X, right? So my language is, in the event of low appraisal, purchaser will pay blank above lender's appraised value, not to exceed ratified contract price. So what that's saying is that if they offer 500 and it appraises at 450 and their appraisal gap is 20,000, that they are willing to pay 470, right? It doesn't say that the seller has to reduce the price. It doesn't say anything else. It says that they cannot ask for the contract price to be reduced less than 470, is what that's saying, essentially.
So if listing agent, I'm representing the buyer, if listing agent says, I understand you're waiving appraisal, you're waiving financing, and here is the FHA mandatory clause we're signing, but then it clearly says that they can walk away, they can void, and which is fine, it's their right to do it. And then if they said, we want to make sure that even though you're waiving it in the contract, but then kind of like the FHA mandatory clause kind of supersedes that or goes against that, is there something, like if they ask for something, do we just not give them anything and say, no, they're waiving?
There's nothing binding. that you can give them. There's nothing binding. Whether or not they sign the amendatory clause or not, or sign the notice of value, it doesn't matter. The buyer still has the right by law to get out of the contract if it appraises low. It doesn't matter whether anyone signs it. So in practice, if you're a listing agent and you're receiving an offer like that, what you're asking for is proof of funds. Show me the money. Okay, I've done my homework, Mr. Buyer's agent. I know that the house is only going to appraise for $450 and you've offered $500 on FHA financing, right? So show me that your buyer has $50,000 plus 3.5% down in closing costs. Show me the money. Same thing if you're a buyer's agent. I will tell you that that is what has gotten our VA buyers to win deals over and over and over again, is when they write the appraisal gap guarantee, even though they have the financing addendum in there, they are showing their bank statements. Show the money. I also think that buyer's agents should be showing the comps as well, because it shows where your mind is on where it's going to appraise. So if you're writing an appraisal gap for 20 grand when you're offering 500 and the comps are only showing 450, that's unprofessional. That's completely unprofessional, because there's no way that there's a meeting of the minds of what that contract price is. So if you are offering 500 and you know the comps are 450, then you better be offering $50,000 in an appraisal gap, right? Because that's not fair to either party to have to go back and negotiate. So when you show the comps as a buyer's agent to the listing agent, then it shows, okay, they did their homework and they really do think that it could appraise for whatever price. And then the gap that they're willing to pay above it brings me back to the price they offered, right? So and that is how we've gotten VA buyers through, showing that. If you're a listing agent, I'm having that same conversation. Years and years ago, I had multiple offers come in, and one of them had an escalation clause that was way far up. And I called the agent and I said, what's going to happen when it doesn't appraise? Because I knew it wasn't going to appraise. And it was, and 2 minutes later, I got a withdrawal of the offer. I'm like, good, goodbye, right? Like, we don't have time for that. I'm not suggesting to my client that they accept an offer because it has a number on it that's not ever going to end up in the bank account, right?
Hey, Shannon, back to Lucia. There's a lot of the appraisal gaps, but just food for thought, and you can clarify this or not. Another way where instead of so many people doing the appraisal gaps as a buyer agent, another option that a lot of agents aren't doing is they're doing an above appraisal guarantee. So if you do your comps as a buyer agent, instead of, hey, we'll pay X amount above, list price and a gap between this, you can simply go in with knowing what it's going to comp, that you're going to pay X amount above the appraisal itself.
So that is what the appraisal gap guarantee is. It cannot exceed the ratified contract price. So that actually is what the appraisal gap is.
Yeah, but there's a difference between paying but I'm saying there's no like limit. I'm just saying a flat above appraisal, not like a gap up to sales price, but like actually.
That's a red flag to lenders when you increase the sale price.
A lot of a winning that way. That's interesting.
They might be winning and they might be having issues in underwriting. Because listen, the appraiser has to put into the appraisal what the contract price is. And if there is too big of a gap between where the offer price is and where the appraisal is, they have to explain it. And if you go and increase the sale price to above what the appraiser had, then you have to go back to the appraiser and have the appraisal amended. to include that information, and it actually becomes a big headache. Now, that is a great thinking outside the box idea that here I'm going to offer you this, but really I'm willing to pay more than what I offered you. But that's not what the lender letter says. That's not what their financing application is for. That's not, it doesn't actually line up when it comes to from the lender piece. So unintended consequences, right? Like it's great when you're doing things up front and it's like, oh, great, I'm going to get the contract ratified. But then what happens after, right? Because there's other pieces involved that you have to worry about. And that appraisal piece, because you're willing to pay above the appraised value and change the sale price, that completely affects the lender. So, be careful on that. Yes, Gail.
Shannon, so this is all about appraisal, but it's kind of different. I have a situation right now. Had an appraisal come in low today. We're due to close next week. I'm the listing agent. The buyer's agent sent me a sales addendum with the new sales price. Well, first of all, the appraisal, we're going to appeal it because I think it's a bad appraisal. Doesn't he have to deliver the notice? Like if he just sends me a sales addendum with a new sales price, what triggers the negotiation period, the delivery of that notice, right? So the complicating factor is the appraisal contingency expires today. So if my seller doesn't sign the sales addendum to the new sales price, because we haven't agreed to that, how long does he have to deliver notice? And will the contingency just expire at the end of today and then they're stuck?
Okay, so what did you see in the contract when you went back and looked at it the other day on how that contingency works?
It says it says they have to deliver the notice.
Well, okay, but if they don't deliver the notice, does the contingency automatically expire or does it automatically continue?
Well, we would have to then deliver notice to them. We would have to ask them, right?
Well, you would deliver notice to them,
right?
That they have 3 days to void the contract,
right?
Okay. Or the contingency is lifted.
So the contingency stays in place. So he doesn't actually have to deliver the notice. He can just send me a sales addendum, and we can agree or not agree to it.
Correct, and the contingency is still in place.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. So we're going to appeal the appraisal. It probably won't happen until next week. I don't need to extend the appraisal contingency time period for negotiation, do I? We have 2 days to negotiate it.
Well, you're not negotiating yet. Remember, you're not there.
Because he hasn't delivered the notice.
And he hasn't sent the notice and the appraisal.
Well, he sent me the appraisal. He just didn't send me the notice. He sent me a sales addendum.
Right. So what we talked about earlier today in the beginning of class was the appraisal notice, the appraisal, and the addendum. Those are the 3 things that get sent when there's a request for the sale price to change.
Okay. And he sent me a sales addendum and the appraisal. He did not send me the notice. So I guess I just want to make sure I understand what that means or doesn't mean.
Well, it means you're still in the appraisal contingency period.
Okay, so he hasn't triggered the negotiation period.
That's correct.
Okay.
So there's lots of options. Remember, what do I say contingencies are about? Earnest money. They're not about getting to closing. They're about earnest money. So you can tell him that he needs to send you the notice to trigger the negotiation period and have everyone sign an addendum extending the negotiation period so that the buyer has time to appeal the appraisal.
Right.
But you can also just let it ride.
Right.
But that may or may not help your seller, right? The seller allowing the appraisal contingency to just go forever might not be the best idea, right? You might actually want a timeline where the buyer has to decide, right? Take it or leave it. Yeah. Especially if the seller has no idea, you know, it wasn't prepared for this to be where the value came in.
Right. I mean, we're due to close in like 6 days. So it's kind of 6 one, half dozen of another at this point. It's either, okay. Okay. Thank you.
It depends on the appeals on the appraisal depend on who the lender is, who the appraiser is, how valid the comps are. Usually the underwriter has to agree when you send back the appeal that the comps were not the correct comps before it goes back to the appraiser to change. And most of the time, unless there is some piece of information that was just incorrect, not just bad comps, but some piece of information that was not correct, you're not going to get a huge change in value. We had one a couple months ago where the square footage was put in wrong for the subject property. And as soon as I looked at the appraisal, I was like, well, that's what the issue is, right? So we sent it to the lender and it was VA, it was Tidewater. And so when I sent it back and we got it fixed, we got almost all the value we needed because the square footage was wrong. But in most cases, the appraiser, if they add another comp or two, they're not gonna change the value substantially.
Even if they take out a bad comp, even if there's a comp in there that shouldn't be in there?
Well, you say shouldn't be in there and they say shouldn't be in there is very different, right? So again, you would have to have real hard evidence, right? Where like they put in a property from Maryland and it was really a Virginia sale, right? Like it has to be something like that where they might just add a comp. And that's usually what happens is they're going to add these additional ones. And that's why you don't get so much more value. They don't take out the ones that you just don't like. They just add more and come up with the value.
It's crazy. What they're using, I have a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house, and they're the number one comp they use is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house that's half the square footage. In no universe is that a comp. You might as well comp it against a townhome or a condo.
Unless it's in the neighborhood.
It's not very close, but anyway, so how long does the process take?
Depends on the lender, depends on the appraiser.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Shannon?
Yes.
So I have a scenario that offer ratified, we're a week away from closing. Appraisal came in higher than contract price. And now my client has to, we're changing from conventional to FHA. So now the listing agent has to, long story short, lender, etc. But listing agent and seller has to sign the FHA mandatory clause. And that's the final requirement for underwriting. And their main concern was that, okay, the FHA mandatory clause, even though they waive appraisal and financing contingency, they could void, right? Which is a moot point because I know my client knows that the appraisal came in higher. They don't know that. We just said it's good. They don't have to know the value. So they're asking for the appraisal report to confirm that there's no risk to the seller. Buyer, I check in with the buyer is okay sharing it and we can share it. My question to you, would there be another way of releasing that concern on the sell side?
If I'm a listing agent and at the 11th hour, I find out that the appraisal was actually an FHA appraisal and not a conventional appraisal, and now we're switching, I absolutely want the appraisal.
Okay. And
I think it's very reasonable what the listing agent is asking for.
Okay.
Yeah, because the lender and the buyer at a minimum knew that this was changing to FHA before that appraisal.
Well, they did not.
Yes, they did, because there's a difference between conventional and FHA appraisals. And if it was a conventional appraisal, then the appraisal they have is not able to be used for them to get to closing. So if this appraisal that they have is what they're using to get to closing, then they absolutely had to know that it was FHA, because they had to order it through an FHA certified appraiser to include certain things in the appraisal. So if they told you they didn't know, they're not telling the truth. The lender and the buyer knew before that appraisal happened, if that is the appraisal being used.
Because it has to be an appraisal, an FHA approved appraiser. Okay.
Correct, with specific criteria that's included. Yep.
So does there, in that scenario, does there need to be an addendum that changes how that gets put in the contract, especially in that percent?
Well, no, because they waived their contingencies. So they, in this scenario, they didn't have any contingency. So if I'm delivering the amendatory clause, even though we know that there's no risk because the appraisal's already done, how does the seller know? The seller doesn't know. Now, many lenders will allow the amendatory clause to be signed at the settlement table. So that is a last resort, although in this scenario, I think that the appraisal should be sent if that's what they're asking for. I think that we still have to maintain that relationship and the rapport with the other agent, if at all possible.
Yeah. Is there any risk, and this is very outside the box, right? Is there any risk that the seller can come back and say, oh, it's a substantial difference between the sales price and the appraisal price? So is there any risk that they can come back and say, oh, we want to renegotiate at this point?
Well, they would be in default if they don't close, and they could be sued for specific performance. So, I mean, is there a risk they say it? Sure. But in the end, it's a bigger risk that they don't close. All right, other questions? Oh, there's a question in the chat. I'm going to put it in the link, where the instructions for this, for the offers. I will put the instructions in the Google Drive where all of the other materials have been. Same place that the rental materials will be put in over the weekend, maybe tonight, probably tomorrow. Those materials will be in there.
Okay, yeah, I was looking at it. I thought you said it was already there, and I was like, I can't find it.
Not yet. Yeah, not yet. All right.
Hey, Shannon, Jeff here.
Yes.
One quick question. If maybe it's not quick, HOA violations. Is there any issue with a buyer saying up front, I'm willing to take on any HOA violations up to a certain amount as part of the offer?
When we reviewed the contingencies and clauses addendum yesterday, we reviewed how the buyer can take those on. It's not a dollar amount, but it's a function of the as-is clause in the contingencies and clauses addendum. They just check a box.
Thank you very much.
All right. Other questions? No? Wow. We're on a roll. 2:30. You guys get to go at 2:30. I know, you had to stay with me till 4 o'clock yesterday. Gee,
Shannon, I can't find the Google Docs file. I clicked on that, but it only gave me yesterday's.
So that's what you were asking for, right?
Yeah, but I didn't get today's at all. I mean, all I got was yesterday's. The link was just today.
Everything that we've done so far is in that one folder. It'll say day 5. It'll say post offer documents.
It doesn't. Mine just says day 4.
Okay. When we finish, you can share your screen with me and I will show you how to get to it.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. All right. Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I will see you at noon on Monday. Have a wonderful weekend.
I had a quick question, Shannon.
Okay, Ryan.
Since we got Ask the Broker one-on-one here, I love it.
Yes.